My son said, "Family is business, Dad. Nothing personal." He said it on a Tuesday afternoon, March 14th, 2023, at exactly 3:40 p.m. I remember, because I looked at the clock above the microwave when the words left his mouth. The clock has been running 5 minutes fast since my wife died. I never corrected it. I suppose I like being slightly ahead of time. I was standing in my kitchen, the one with the pale oak cabinets Margaret chose in 1998, holding a mug of coffee gone cold. Daniel was sitting at the table where he used to do his math homework, now scrolling through projections on his iPad Pro, the large one 12.9 inches, with a cracked corner he never bothers to fix. "Family is business," he repeated, tapping the screen. "If we're going to do this expansion properly, we need clean structures, clean expectations. Clean. That's a word accountants like. I used to like it too. I'm 72 years old. I spent 41 of those years running Cunningham and Price accounting services out of a modest brick office on Maple Avenue. We did small business taxes, payroll audits. Nothing glamorous. Honest work. By the time I retired in 2019, I had 312 active clients and a reputation for being meticulous to the point of irritation. I sold my half of the firm for $480,000. After taxes, fees, and the celebratory dinner Daniel insisted on at Ruth's Chris. $612 for 4 people, including a bottle of Cabernet he chose. I cleared roughly $402,000. That money was supposed to be my cushion. Instead, it became seed capital. Daniel's company, Vertex Logistics Solutions, was poised for explosive growth. That's how he phrased it in his PowerPoint presentation back in January 2020, when the world still believed in steady expansion and 5-year plans. "I just need $150,000 to secure the warehouse lease," he told me then, leaning forward, eyes bright. "The landlord wants a 2-year guarantee up front. It's standard." Standard. I transferred $150,000 on February 3rd, 2020. I remember the confirmation number, 884-2716. I printed it and placed it in a blue folder labeled Daniel, loan. Loan, not gift. We drafted a promissory note, 12 pages, for % annual interest. Repayment schedule beginning January 2022. He hugged me after we signed it. "Dad, you won't regret this." I didn't hug him back as tightly as I used to when he was small. Age stiffens more than joints. The first year, 2020, was chaos. Pandemic. Supply chains collapsing. Daniel called me almost daily. "Cash flow is tight. Clients are delaying payments. We need to pivot to regional distribution." Each sentence came with a number attached. $38,000 for new forklifts. $72,500 for software integration with Oracle NetSuite. $19,800 for consulting fees. By December 2021, my total temporary advances to Vertex Logistics stood at $287,400. I know the figure because I reconciled it myself on New Year's Eve while reheating leftover pot roast in the microwave. Margaret used to hate when I worked on holidays. "Sheila from church says you'd bring a calculator to your own funeral," she would laugh. Margaret has been gone 7 years now. Ovarian cancer. Stage for, by the time we caught it. The hospital bills totaled $96,312 after insurance. I paid every cent without complaint. I do not complain easily. Daniel began missing the scheduled repayments in early 2022. "Dad, let's just roll the interest into equity," he suggested one evening over takeout time. Patsy, EW, too sweet, and spring rolls that tasted of freezer burn. "It makes more sense tax-wise." Tax-wise. I taught him what that phrase means. "Equity means risk," I said quietly. "Everything is risk," he shrugged. "You taught me that too." By June 2022, I had extended an additional $85,000 to cover what he called a bridge shortfall. Total exposure, $372,400. I began dipping into my brokerage account, the one Margaret and I built slowly over decades. Blue chip stocks, municipal bonds, sensible things. My monthly pension is $3,850. Social Security adds $2,140. My expenses, utilities, groceries, Medicare supplemental insurance, property taxes on this house, average $4,900 a month. Comfortable, not extravagant, but comfortable shrinks quickly when you wire 6 figures to your son. The first time I felt something shift was not about money. It was about tone. We were sitting in my living room in September 2022. The air conditioner rattled like it always does at the end of summer. Daniel was explaining a new financing round. We're bringing in outside investors, he said. They'll want preferred shares. It's standard. And my position? I asked. He hesitated. Just a flicker. Well, technically your advances would convert to common equity unless we restructure. Technically. I noticed he no longer said your loan. It was your advances. Softened. Blurred. And the house, he added casually, eyes still on a screen. We might need to show stronger personal backing to secure the $500,000 credit line from First National. The house. 3 bedrooms. 2 baths. 2,400 square feet. Appraised last year at $740,000. What do you mean? I asked, just as a guarantor. It's paperwork. Family is business, Dad. Nothing personal. That was the moment. March 14 th. 3:40 p.m. the microwave clock blinking 5 minutes ahead of a life I suddenly wasn't sure I recognized. I looked at my son, my only child, and saw not the boy who once cried because he'd broken a neighbor's window, but a man calculating leverage. You're asking me to secure $500,000 with my home, I said. He sighed, impatient. It's not like we'd ever default. This is strategic growth. Strategic. I set the cold coffee down in the sink. The porcelain made a dull sound, like a gavel without authority. I'll need to review the documents, I told him. He smiled then, not warmly, efficiently. Of course. I'll have our attorney send them over. Our attorney. That was new too. When he left that afternoon, he didn't hug me. He tapped his watch instead. I've got a 5 p.m. call with Chicago, he said. I stood at the front door long after his Tesla pulled away. The driveway still carries faint oil stains from the old Ford pickup I drove for 15 years. Marks of work, of weight. Inside, the house felt quieter than usual. The refrigerator hummed. The baseboard heater clicked. On the kitchen table lay a folder he'd forgotten to take. Vertex Logistics. Credit Facility Proposal. I opened it slowly, the way you open medical test results when you already suspect the diagnosis. And for the first time in my life, I began to read my own son's paperwork, not as a father, but as an auditor. If you believe older voices still matter, support this channel with a like and a subscription. I did not sleep that night. At 72, sleep is already in negotiation. Half an Ambien tablet on the bedside table, a glass of water. The soft hum of the air purifier Margaret insisted we buy in 2016. But that night, I left the pill untouched. I wanted my mind sharp. Sharp is a habit. At 6:05 a.m., or 6:10 if you trust the microwave, I was already at the kitchen table with my old HP laptop open. It still runs Windows 10, slow but obedient. Unlike most things these days, Daniel's email had arrived at 11:48 p.m. Subject, Credit Facility Documents, Urgent. Attachments, 7 PDFs. Total size 18.4 megabytes. I clicked the first file. First National Bank. Commercial Credit Agreement. 43 pages. I read every line. Principal amount, $500,000. Interest rate, prime plus 2.75%. Maturity, 36 months. Personal guarantee required from Daniel Cunningham. Additional guarantee, Robert Cunningham. Me. Collateral, business assets and secondary residential property located at 2147 Willow Crest Drive. My house. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the refrigerator cycle off. Silence filled the kitchen. Thick and almost polite. Secondary residential property. That is what 43 years of mortgage payments become. The appraisal attached was dated February 28, 2023. Estimated market value, $755,000. Estimated quick sale value, $690,000. Quick sale. Banks love that phrase. I made coffee fresh this time. Measured 2 level tablespoons into the filter like I've done for decades. The smell grounded me. Numbers are easier to face with caffeine. By page 17, I noticed something that made me stop. There was already an existing UCC, one filing against Vertex Logistics from September 2022. A secured interest held by Midstate Equipment Financing for $218,000. Forklifts. So when Daniel said this new line of credit was clean, he meant layered. By page 26, I found a clause labeled cross-default provision. If Vertex defaulted on any obligation over $25,000, First National could accelerate the entire $500,000 loan and pursue guarantors immediately. Immediately. I opened Excel and began building a projection model the way I used to for clients who insisted everything was under control. Revenue, 2022, $1.8 million. Net profit margin, as stated 6%. Actual retained earnings after debt service, estimated closer to 2.1%. 2% of $1.8 million is $36,000. Annual interest alone on $500,000 at current rates would exceed $40,000. I stared at the screen. This was not expansion. This was oxygen on credit. At 9:12 a.m., Daniel called. Did you get the docs? Yes. And I'm reviewing. A pause. I could hear keyboard clicks on his end. Efficiency as background noise. Dad, the bank needs a signed commitment by Friday. We're closing on the new distribution contract April 1st. What's the penalty if you don't? Another pause. Slightly longer. We'd lose the contract. How much is the contract worth? Projected $2.4 million annually. Projected, I repeated. His exhale carried impatience now. You always do this. You overanalyze. That's what kept food on your plate, I said quietly. Silence. Then sharper. This is what I mean. Family is business. If you were just an investor, you'd look at upside, not worst-case scenarios. If I were just an investor, I replied, I demand preferred shares and board oversight. He laughed once. Short. You don't need oversight. You need trust. Trust. A word that becomes fragile when tied to $500,000. I want to see full financials, I said. Cash flow statements for Q4 2022 and Q1 2023, and copies of all outstanding debt agreements. That's excessive. It's due diligence. The line went quiet for 3 seconds. I counted them. Fine, he said finally. I'll have Melissa send them. Melissa, his CFO, 34 years old, MBA from Northwestern. I met her once. Firm handshake. Eyes that calculated faster than most spreadsheets. The documents arrived that afternoon. By evening, my dining table was covered in paper. Highlighted sections, handwritten notes, columns of figures. I had not spread documents like this since I sold the firm. And yet, my hands remembered. One line item kept repeating under owner distributions. 2022 total, $142,000. Compensation restructuring. Daniel had called it. I dialed him at 7:46 p.m. You paid yourself $142,000 last year. I run the company. Net profit was barely $60,000 after debt service. It's standard executive compensation. For company leveraged at nearly 4:1, I asked. His tone hardened. You're looking at raw numbers without context. I am looking at risk, I said, and you're asking me to absorb it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, if you don't back this, Dad, investors will see hesitation. It signals weakness. Weakness. There it was. Not concern for my home. Not acknowledgement of my exposure. Optics. You've already pledged business assets, I said. And there's the mid-state lien. That's manageable. With what liquidity? You wouldn't understand the speed we operate at. The words landed like a small slap. I built that speed into him. I understand leverage, I replied. And I understand collapse. He let out a frustrated breath. So what are you saying? I looked around my kitchen, at the chipped tile near the stove, at Margaret's ceramic fruit bowl still holding 3 apples, at the stack of unopened mail I sort every Sunday. I'm saying, I said slowly, that if family is business, then we formalize this properly. What does that mean? It means I don't sign anything until my interests are secured. Preferred position, asset coverage, and restrictions on your distributions. You're treating me like a stranger. No, I said. I'm treating you like a client. The silence that followed was different this time. Colder. Do what you have to do, he said at last. But don't expect this to feel the same. The line disconnected. I sat there for a long while, listening to the house settle around me. With contracts at night, pipes murmur. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt something settle inside me too. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. Clarity is a dangerous thing. It strips sentiment from the bones. By Thursday morning, I'd built 3 scenarios in Excel. Optimistic, realistic, and what I labeled, without poetry, failure cascade. In the optimistic model, Vertex secured the $2.4 million distribution contract. Margins improved to 8%, and debt service remained manageable. My guarantee would never be triggered. In the realistic model, margins stayed thin. Receivables stretched beyond 60 days, and cash flow gaps widened. The $500,000 line of credit would become permanent oxygen. In the failure cascade, one major client defaulted. The cross-default clause activated. First National accelerated the loan. My house became secondary residential collateral. Secondary. I printed the spreadsheets and placed them in a new folder. Not blue this time. Red. Daniel came by that evening, 18 p.m. He always arrives slightly early when he wants something signed. He walked in without knocking, as if the house still recognized him as a boy. You've had time to think, he said, placing his Tesla key card on the counter next to Margaret's old sugar bowl. I've had time to calculate. He didn't smile. We sat at the kitchen table. The overhead light flickered once before settling. I had already arranged the documents neatly, bank agreement on the left, my projections on the right. I'll sign, I said. His shoulders loosened almost imperceptibly, but not as drafted. There it was again, tension snapping back into place. What does that mean? It means I require a secured position ahead of common equity, a formal board seat with veto authority over additional debt, and a restriction on executive distributions until retained earnings exceed 12% of annual revenue. He stared at me as if I had begun speaking Latin. This isn't some public corporation, he said. It's my company. It is a leveraged entity seeking personal collateral from me. You're overcomplicating this. No, I replied quietly. I'm de-risking it. He stood up and began pacing, something he did as a teenager when arguing about curfews. Investors won't like this structure. Investors aren't pledging their homes. You don't trust me? The word trust again, worn thin. I trust arithmetic, I said. He stopped pacing. You know what Melissa said? He asked, voice sharpening. She said this is exactly why family financing is messy. Emotions distort strategy. And yet here you are. His jaw tightened. You're making this adversarial. I'm making it formal. The distinction mattered to me. Apparently not to him. He pulled out his phone and tapped something rapidly. A moment later, my email chimed. Amended agreement, he said. Look at section 12. I open it. Personal guarantee from Robert Cunningham limited to $250,000 instead of $500,000. House still listed as collateral. That's not a limitation, I said. That's optics. It halves your exposure. It still exposes my primary residence. It's a calculated risk. The word exploded in the room. Calculated. Yes, I said slowly. It is. I slid my red folder toward him and opened to the failure cascade model. Walk me through this, I said. He glanced down reluctantly. If your Chicago client delays payment by 90 days, your receivables spike to $640,000. That strains payroll. You draw down the full $500,000 line. Interest accumulates. Midstate enforces its lien if you miss equipment payments. First, National invokes cross-default. That's worst case. It's plausible case. He looked up at me then, not as a son, but as a man evaluating opposition. You've already decided not to sign, he said. No, I replied. I've decided not to subsidize optimism. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You'd rather watch it fail? I would rather restructure it to survive. Silence again. Heavy now. He picked up the red folder and flipped through the pages. I watched his face move from irritation to something closer to recognition. You ran projections assuming no new investor capital, he said. You have no signed term sheets. We're close. Close doesn't service debt. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. You know what this looks like, he said finally. It looks like you want control. The accusation hung between us. I want protection, I answered. For what? You're 72. What are you protecting this house for? Memories? There are sentences that alter temperature. That was one. Yes, I said. He exhaled sharply. You can't take it with you. No, I agreed. But I can choose to risk it. The argument ended not with resolution, but with distance. He gathered the documents, slid them into his leather portfolio. So what's your final answer? He asked at the door. My final answer, I said, is that I will extend $250,000 as a secured loan. No house collateral. No personal guarantee beyond that amount. Board oversight formalized. And if the bank refuses, then you seek alternative financing. He stared at me for a long moment. You're forcing my hand. No, I said. I'm declining to tie mine. He left without another word. I stood in the doorway and watched the red taillights disappear into the early spring dusk. The magnolia tree in the yard had just begun to bloom. Margaret loved that tree, said it smelled like dignity. At 9:03 p.m. my phone rang. First National Bank. Mr. Cunningham, the loan officer said pleasantly, we've received notice that you may be reconsidering your guarantor status. Before we proceed, we should clarify something. Yes, I said. There is already a personal guarantee on file from you dated October 12, 2022. My hand tightened around the phone. I did not sign such a document. A pause. We have your signature, sir. Notarized. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. Email it to me, I said. When it arrived, I opened the PDF slowly. There was my name. There was my address. There was a signature that looked disturbingly like mine, and beneath it in crisp legal font, personal unlimited guarantee, $500,000. The notary stamp was real. The date was real. October 12th, 2022. The day Daniel had taken me to lunch to celebrate a strong quarter. I sat down, and for the first time since this began, I felt something other than clarity. I felt anger. There are two kinds of betrayal. The emotional kind, loud, theatrical, full of tears, and the quiet one, the one that comes with a notary stamp. October 12th, 2022. I opened my calendar archive. I still keep everything in Outlook color-coded the way I did when I ran the firm. 12:30 p.m., lunch with Daniel. Bistro 44. I remember that lunch now with an unpleasant clarity. Grilled salmon. He ordered a second glass of wine. I had iced tea because I never mix alcohol with paperwork. There had been paperwork. Just routine updates, he'd said, sliding a thin stack of documents across the table. The bank wants refreshed signature pages for the equipment lease. I remember adjusting my glasses. I remember skimming the top sheet. I remember trusting the son I raised. What I do not remember is signing an unlimited personal guarantee. Yet there it was. My name, my looping R, the slight break in the sea of Cunningham where my pen always hesitates. But something was wrong. Subtle. The baseline of the signature tilted downward at a sharper angle than usual, and the pressure on the final M was heavier. I know my own handwriting the way a surgeon knows bone structure. I printed the document and placed it under a magnifying desk lamp I've had since 1994. The same lamp I used to review client ledgers when something fell off. The ink saturation varied unnaturally. A scanned overlay? A lifted signature? I called the notary listed on the stamp. Her name was Angela Morris. She answered on the third ring. Yes, I notarized that document, she said. Mr. Cunningham was present. I was? Yeah, sir. October 12th, around 3 p.m. at a T-Vertex logistics office. 3 p.m. At 3 p.m., I had been home. I remember because the HVAC technician was here, replacing the capacitor unit. I wrote him a check for $480. Check number 1183. I pulled my checkbook ledger from a drawer. There it was. October 12th, 2:47 p.m., $480. Air Pro Services. Ms. Morris, I said evenly. What form of identification did you verify? Driver's license. Number? She hesitated. I don't keep that recorded unless required. Was the signer alone? No, his son was present. Of course he was. Did you physically watch him sign? Yes. Her confidence was irritatingly calm. Would you be willing to provide a sworn statement? I asked. That would need to go through the bank. I thanked her and hung up. The kitchen felt colder. I walked to the hallway closet and retrieved the small fireproof box where I keep critical documents: deed, Margaret's will, my passport. My driver's license was there, expired in 2021. I renewed it November 3rd, 2022. On October 12th, my valid ID had been the old one, which I had reported misplaced in September. Misplaced. Daniel had driven me to the DMV for the replacement. My chest tightened, not from age, but from realization. This had not been casual. This had been structured. At 4:15 p.m., I called an old colleague, Thomas Green, securities attorney, 75 years old, retired, but still sharper than most practicing lawyers. "Tom," I said, "how do you feel about forensic ink analysis?" He didn't laugh. "Whose signature?" he asked. "Mine." He was silent for a long moment. "Come by tomorrow," he said finally. The next morning, I carried the documents in the red folder. Tom's office still smelled of old books and toner. He studied the signature under his own magnifier. "Could be a high-quality scan transfer," he muttered. "Or you signed a page that was later attached." "I did not knowingly sign this." He nodded. "Then we treat it as potential fraud." The word sat heavily between us. Fraud. Not misunderstanding. Not miscommunication. Fraud. "First," Tom continued, "we send a formal dispute to First National. Demand original wet ink documentation. Second, we file notice of potential unauthorized instrument. Third, we freeze any further encumbrance on your property." "Will that trigger action against Vertex?" I asked. "It might." I considered that. Might. Daniel had wanted speed, expansion, optics. What he had created instead was exposure. "I also want a full forensic review of Vertex's filings," I said. Tom raised an eyebrow. "You suspect more?" "I suspect pressure," I replied, "and pressure distorts judgment." We drafted the dispute letter that afternoon. Precise. Clinical. Subject: notice of contested personal guarantee. Dated October 12, 2022. By 5:42 p.m., it was sent certified mail and electronically. At 7:11 p.m., Daniel called. "What did you do?" he asked, no greeting. "I protected myself." "You blindsided the bank. You attached my house to a $500,000 liability without informed consent. You signed it." "Did I?" Silence. Then lower. "You're going to destroy everything we built." I almost laughed. I built nothing in this company," I said. "I funded it." "You're overreacting." "Am I?" "They'll freeze the credit line." "They should." His breathing was sharp now. "Dad, listen to me carefully. If this deal collapses, payroll won't clear next month." There it was. Not growth. Survival. "How much is payroll?" I asked. $186,000 monthly. "And current liquidity?" Another pause. "About $94,000. I closed my eyes. "You were already insolvent," I said quietly. "We were bridging. With my house." He didn't deny it. "You taught me to take risks," he said suddenly, almost accusing. "I taught you to understand them." He lowered his voice. "You think I forged your signature? I think you were desperate." That hurt him. I could hear it. "I would never steal from you." "You already did," I said softly. "You stole consent." The line went silent. When he spoke again, the edge was gone. "They'll call this criminal." "I didn't," I replied. Another long pause. "Can we fix this?" he asked finally. That question carried something fragile. "Yes," I said, "but not with shortcuts." I ended the call and sat alone in my living room. The magnolia blossoms outside were opening fully now. Margaret once told me that dignity is not loud. It is simply firm. And for the first time since March 14th, I did not feel like a father negotiating with his son. I felt like a man drawing a boundary in ink that could not be scanned, copied, or quietly repurposed. And somewhere, beneath the anger, beneath the disappointment, I began drafting an invoice. Banks move quickly when the word fraud appears in writing. On Monday at 8:32 a.m., First National's risk department called. By 10:15 a.m., Vertex Logistics' $500,000 credit line was placed under temporary administrative hold pending verification of guarantor authorization. Temporary. By 1:47 p.m., Daniel called. "They froze everything," he said without preamble. We can't draw the remaining $220,000. How much have you already drawn? I asked. 280. Of course. And current payables? $312,000 due within 14 days. The numbers no longer startled me. They arranged themselves calmly in my mind like columns on a ledger. You were already upside down, I said. We were managing it, with acceleration clauses breathing down your neck. He was pacing. I could hear it, the hollow echo of warehouse flooring. Dad, payroll hits Friday. If funds don't clear, 36 employees don't get paid. 36. That landed heavier than I expected. I didn't create this structure, I said quietly. You detonated it. No, I corrected him. I removed my house from it. There was a long silence. What do you want? He asked finally. It was the first honest question he'd asked in months. I want full transparency, I said. I want audited statements. I want control provisions. And I want the October 12th document investigated. You're going to drag your own son into court? I'm going to drag facts into light. By Wednesday, the bank requested an in-person meeting. Location: First National Downtown Branch, 14th floor conference room. Friday, 9:00 a.m. Daniel insisted I attend. Optics, he said again. I almost smiled at the repetition. Friday morning, I wore my gray suit, the one Margaret bought me for our 40th anniversary dinner. It still fits. I maintain things. The conference room was glass on 3 sides, polished walnut table, filtered water in carafes no one touches. Daniel looked tired, dark crescents under his eyes. Melissa sat beside him, laptop open, expression professionally neutral. Across from us, Mr. Harris, senior risk officer, mid-50s, efficient eyes. Gentlemen, Harris began, we have a contested personal guarantee and a liquidity event. Let's proceed clearly. He slid a folder toward me. Original guarantee. Wet ink. I examined it carefully. It was not a scan. It was my signature, but not on the original document. The first 2 pages were crisp. The signature page showed subtle misalignment along the staple edge. Was this assembled after execution? I asked. Harris blinked once. It was submitted as a complete instrument. Submitted, I repeated. I turned to Daniel. Did you detach a signed page from another document? Melissa's fingers froze over her keyboard. Daniel swallowed. We needed the bank to move quickly, he said. The equipment lease signature page had your notarized acknowledgement. It was the same format. You repurposed my signature, I said evenly. It wasn't malicious. It was unauthorized. Harris interjected smoothly. Regardless of intent, this constitutes misrepresentation to the bank. Melissa finally spoke. We can restructure. Convert existing draw to short-term secured note. Personal guarantee removed. With what collateral? Harris asked. Accounts receivable. Harris shook his head slightly. They're already pledged to Midstate. Silence settled like dust. I opened my red folder. I am prepared, I said calmly, to extend $250,000 directly to Vertex as senior secured debt, conditioned upon immediate resignation of current CFO authority over debt instruments, full board control provision, and suspension of executive distributions. Melissa's eyes flicked to Daniel. Senior secured? Harris asked. First position, I clarified. Ahead of all unsecured creditors. Filed immediately. Daniel stared at me. You're stripping me of control. I am purchasing stability. This is my company. This is arithmetic. Harris leaned back slightly. If Mr. Cunningham provides $250,000 secured capital, the bank can reduce exposure and restructure remaining balance over 12 months. And the fraud matter? I asked. Harris looked at Daniel. That depends on remedial action. Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. We correct it. Officially. The meeting ended at 10:42 a.m. By 2:00 p.m., my attorney had drafted the secured loan agreement. Principal, $250,000. Interest, 6.5%. Security, first lien on all receivables and inventory. Board authority. Majority vote required for debt exceeding $50,000. Executive compensation cap, $90,000 annually until debt ratio falls below 2 to 1. Daniel signed at 4:16 p.m. This time I watched him. No reuse pages. No detached signatures. By 5:30 p.m., funds were wired. Payroll cleared Friday. The bank formally withdrew the unlimited personal guarantee Monday morning. An internal compliance review was initiated at Vertex. Melissa resigned 2 weeks later. Daniel and I met again 3 days after that. Not at the office. At my kitchen table. He looked smaller there. I didn't mean for it to spiral, he said. It already had, I replied. You treated me like a hostile takeover. You told me family is business. He winced. I was trying to sound strong. Strength isn't volume, I said quietly. It's structure. He stared at the wood grain of the table where he once carved his initials at age 12. I never sanded them out. You could have let it fail, he said. Yes, but you didn't. No. Why? I considered that. Because I am not vindictive. Because 36 employees have mortgages. Because despite everything, he is my son. But I said none of that. I protected my asset, I answered evenly. He nodded slowly. There were no hugs, no dramatic reconciliation, just terms. Over the next 6 months, Vertex downsized, closed the Chicago expansion, focused on regional contracts. Debt reduced gradually. Daniel's salary dropped. He complained once. I showed him the covenant ratio. He stopped complaining. And my house? It remains exactly where it has always been. Magnolia blooming each spring. Mortgage long paid. Deed unencumbered. Sometimes late in the evening, I sit at the kitchen table and review the updated balance sheet. Not because I need to, because I choose to. Daniel was right about one thing. Family can feel like business. The difference is this. In business, you issue invoices. In family, you issue boundaries. He said, nothing personal. So I made it professional. And in the end, the only signature that truly mattered was the one I refused to give. The last payment cleared on October 31st. I know the date because I marked it in red ink on the paper calendar I still keep by the refrigerator. Old habits do not retire. They simply slow down. Vertex Logistics wired $38,412.67. The final installment of principal and accrued interest. The memo line read, loan satisfaction. RC Senior Secured Note. Clinical. Accurate. No emojis. By then, a year had passed since the October 12th guarantee. A year since I discovered how thin the line can be between trust and leverage. The restructuring worked, but not the way Daniel had originally imagined. There was no Chicago expansion. No glossy investor decks. The warehouse in Aurora's subleased in March. 12 employees were laid off in April. Daniel delivered that news himself. I insisted. If you're CEO, I told him you absorb consequence. Revenue stabilized at $1.2 million annually. Debt ratio dropped below 1.8 to 1. Modest. Sustainable. Unimpressive to venture capitalists. Perfectly respectable to me. Daniel's salary remained capped at $90,000 until September. He didn't like that, but he complied. Compliance is underrated. Our relationship adjusted into something quieter, less sentimental, more deliberate. We no longer spoke in assumptions. We scheduled meetings. He brought financial statements printed and tabbed. I brought questions. The first time he addressed me as chairman in a board session, half ironic, half resigned. I did not correct him. Titles matter when trust fractures. In January, I made a decision I had been considering since the bank meeting. I updated my estate plan. Margaret's old will left everything to me outright, then to Daniel upon my death. Simple, clean, naive. Thomas drafted a new structure, a testamentary trust. Vertex shares placed under independent trustee oversight upon my death. Distributions contingent upon debt ratios and compliance covenants. No unilateral authority. Daniel signed the acknowledgement page without argument. That, more than anything, told me he had learned something. In March, almost exactly 1 year after family is business, Daniel invited me to lunch again at Bistro 44. Same table near the window. No wine this time. I was wrong, he said before the menus arrived. About what? I wondered, but I let him speak. I confused speed with strength, he continued, and I confused access with permission. I studied his face. He looked older, not physically, but in the way men look after they've stared at insolvency long enough. You also confused signature with consent, I added. He nodded. I justified it. Told myself he would have signed anyway. That is how most fraud begins, I said quietly, with justification. He didn't flinch. I'm not asking you to forget it, he said. Just don't see me as a criminal. I considered that carefully. I don't, I replied. I see you as a man who learned the cost of shortcuts. The waiter refilled our water glasses. Outside, spring light moved across the pavement. Ordinary, unremarkable. After lunch, Daniel walked me to my car, an aging Lexus with 142,000 miles. I maintained things. Are we okay, he asked. Such a small question. No, I said. He looked startled. We're not what we were, I clarified, but we are stable. He absorbed that. Stability is not romance. It is structure. That summer, I sold a portion of my brokerage account, $300,000, not for Vertex, but for myself. I purchased a small lake house 2 hours north. Modest, 1,600 square feet. Docks slightly uneven. Smells faintly of cedar and old varnish. I did not ask Daniel's opinion. I informed him. I thought you were protecting liquidity, he said. I am, I replied, by diversifying joy. He laughed at that. Genuinely, I kept the Willow Crest house. It holds too much history to liquidate casually. Margaret's magnolia blooms wider every year. I sit beneath it some mornings with coffee and watch sunlight move across wood siding I paid off in 2003. No liens, no encumbrances, clean title. Sometimes Daniel visits on Sundays. He brings his laptop, less often now. We talk about operations, yes, but also about ordinary things. Weather, fuel costs, a book I'm rereading. He still says optics occasionally. I raise an eyebrow when he does. In September, First National closed its internal review. The October 12th instrument was formally voided. The bank issued a quiet notice of procedural discrepancy. No criminal charges, no lawsuits. The matter resolved professionally. But resolution does not mean erasure. Trust is not a balance sheet that resets to zero. It accrues slowly. It depreciates faster. The day the final loan payment cleared, I did something simple. I printed the confirmation page, stamped it paid in red ink, and filed it under a new tab labeled Lessons. I am 73 now. Awake at 6:00 a.m. The microwave clock still runs 5 minutes fast. I still haven't corrected it. Some habits remain intentionally imperfect. Daniel once told me family is business. He was wrong. Family is not business. But if someone insists on turning it into one, then you had better know how to read a contract, how to challenge a signature, and how to draw a boundary without trembling. I did not destroy my son. I did not abandon him. I did not surrender my house. I audited the damage. I restructured the risk. And I taught him something no MBA ever could. Capital can be replaced. Reputation can recover. But consent, once forged, must be reclaimed in ink. These days, when Daniel leaves my driveway, he pauses before getting into his car, not to calculate, to look back. And I stand on my porch under the magnolia Margaret planted, knowing that in the end, I did what any responsible man does when accounts are compromised. I close the books, on my terms. If you believe older voices still matter, support this channel with a like and a subscription.